This is The Poet and the Poem from the Library of Congress. We are still on remote. Luther Jett is here. He's the author of several books of poems, and he's well known as a beloved poet in Maryland. So let's have a poem. Luther Jett.
Thank you, Grace. I will start with this poem from my collection, Everyone Disappears. From a high window. My mother is crying in stars. From a sky unexpectedly broad murmur, what is all this about? She says, I'm going lots of places. Don't wait supper for me. And from a high window comes the sound of coughing late in the carnival night that no one in the gray house can explain. And I, a world distant, reach the bench only after passing many doors that open onto rooms I cannot know, and in them all my mother lies weeping until the stars go out.
Luther, I think you could teach a course on how to read a poem because it is to love the vowels. The way you read that poem and the way you pause at unexpected places is where we get the energy. And that is one of my favorite poems from you. Now, I'm looking at a dozen poems of yours on my desk, and every one is almost the same length. Some have two stanzas. What do you think is the energy of the poem that knows when it wants to stop? I mean, you're meticulously the same.
It's a fair question. I think some of the poems stop sooner than others. There are definitely poems that I'm not sure when they stop. And I have definitely written poems that turned out to be two poems, and I had to break them in half. So, it really depends on the poem. I think, though, that there is a point when the poem stops singing.
That's a good one.
Yeah, and when it stops singing, you know to put the pen down.
But how does it sing inside the poet? Is it a matter of energy? Because some people have a longer song than others. So your energy seems to be exactly the same when you sit down to write.
It's not. It's just that you're looking at finished work.
Fair point. That is very fair. That's very fair. Well, let us test you then with a couple more poems. And I just want everyone to know that you have been nominated for the Pushcart Prize very recently, and you have had, I think, 5 books published. The author of 5 chapbooks.
Yes, there are 5, and they're all chapbooks.
Yes. Now you seem to have an energy in wanting a book of less than 42 pages also.
For the most part, they come out that way, although I do have a manuscript that's longer than that.
Well, we want to go deeper and deeper with Luther Jett. I'm Grace Cavalieri, and this is The Poet and the Poem from the Library of Congress. And Luther's going to give us 2 poems and set them up, please.
Okay, these are both also from Everyone Disappears. And one is, it's really the title poem, although the title of the poem is not Everyone Disappears, but is Why the Ocean Tastes of Tears. Everyone goes away. Everyone disappears. That should not surprise anyone. It comes with the ticking of clocks in upstairs halls, with the shadows of afternoons that turn golden before fading, and the last star left shining between the midnight west and balm dark dawn. My mother cries at her kitchen sink, and the girl I argued with washes out her paintbrushes in a room I have never known. Voices fill the air. Small birds go south. The snow melts slowly. Everyone disappears. When you most want them to stay, everyone goes somewhere else. And that is why the ocean tastes of tears. It's the one thing you can count on. When you close your eyes, you dream, and if anyone is still there when you wake, you've witnessed a revolution.
Luther Jett, I'm going to tell you something no one's ever told you before, and that is the brilliance of the one syllable word, which I don't think you're even conscious of doing. Listen, it's the one thing we can count on. One thing we can count on. 7 one-syllable words are like a heartbeat. And you do this over and over and over. Luther, are you aware of what you're doing?
Not as you've just put it. When I write, it's coming from somewhere within or without. I'm not always sure. I strive to write as if I were using a language that I was not born into.
Say more
And,
about that.
well, I'm really fascinated by work in translation, even though I myself am not fluent enough to do any translation. And when anyone speaks, you're really translating. And poets particularly are really translating what they observe and what they feel into something that they hope others will understand or relate to.
Well said, Luther. Well said. And I, for one, would love you to make a CD of your poetry because you read it like truly no one else reads a poem. So let's have 2 more.
All right, here are
And
two.
what book will this be coming from?
This these will also be from Everyone Disappears. I have some other work, but we'll just go with this for a while.
Okay, but let me title the other books, and they are Not Quite, Poems Written in Search of My Father, Our Situation, Everyone Disappears, Little Wars, Watchmen, What of the Night. Here's Luther Jett.
Thank you. This one is called Nightmares. My family has gone into town, leaving me with the house to myself, dishes everywhere, piles of laundry, books scattered across the floor. I am salvaging trinkets from forgotten fairs. The back door will not stay closed. Something out there wants in. The wind picks up. Snow covers the yard. Trees lose their shapes. The sky going black. I don't know where I am. The dead return to life. My mother saw them walking on the ceiling, then went up to speak with them. When I was a child in the darkest night hour, the grandfather clock at the foot of the stair would move through our rooms when it thought we were all asleep.
Oh, Luther, what a last line that is. I always say we writers are writing the same story over and over. And would I be right in saying that your story is making the dream world and the real world come together with some sort of sense?
That's that's interesting. It's I think you may be right. I don't, you know, a lot of my poems do, and that one certainly does. It shifts between dream and reality. Um, and all I can say is it was based on a real dream.
Which
And
I
it's,
value. I think the nighttime
yeah.
mind is way underserved. I think the
Yeah.
nighttime mind is where the action is, and you use it, and then you burnish it, and then you shape it, and then you massage it. Luther Jett, I'm Grace Cavalieri. We're still in remote because COVID is still out there someplace, but it's as almost as good as being together. So I would like to ask you a little bit about your performance piece, because I wish I had known about it. It was done by the Capitol Fringe Festival in Washington. What was this?
Well, this was probably the second or third year that the Fringe Festival was operating, and I thought, I think I'm going to try this because it's experimental to, get up and basically recite poetry in front of an audience and act it through. Um, it is the only time in my life that I've had to declare a capital loss.
What does that mean?
It means that I spent more, even though you never heard of it, I spent more on the publicity and on the other incidental costs. Like you had to insure yourself. It was the only
And what
cost.
are you worth? Luther, what are you worth?
Hmm?
What is your insurance
Oh,
policy worth?
I've forgotten, but it was enough to undo my overhead.
Welcome to the theater world. I always say
Yeah.
there's money in art because it's all mine. Yes. Well, did you enjoy it? And what piece did you read?
I read I read a sequence of poems that are from, I alluded to a full-length manuscript that I continue to work on. I continue to punch it up and revise it and add to it, just like Walt Whitman, except that Walt Whitman's was published first,
Yes,
and
but he
I'm
published
still
his
putting
own.
it out.
He
Yeah, he
published his
did do
own,
that.
and then he passed them out free. So I think he's a very good icon. Let's have two more beautiful Luther Jet poems.
Yeah. Let's shift gears then. Um, and I'm going to read some recent material, if that's all right.
Well, we would
You,
love a
yeah, well,
premiere.
you've seen it ahead of time anyway. These are dealing with current events that are still. This is still happening. Um, but the first one, and I'm speaking primarily of Ukraine, but to me, Ukraine is symbolic of the struggle that we're all dealing with right now. They're just on the front lines. And this is called Fairy Tales. Let's pretend the moon is made from cheese and bees go there when they die. And the river runs backward on alternate weeks. And oh, the tallest peaks are covered in ice cream. You could climb them in just 10 giant steps or fly. Yeah, let's pretend we can fly. Also, let's pretend that summer will have no end. The rifle isn't loaded. Those are not dead bodies there, floating in the city square. And I wrote that after the tragic discoveries in Bucha. It's almost a year ago now in April. The color war. This is directed at a certain individual, but he's not alone. He wants an end to color. Sky, only tarnished silver, land, a sickly pail of mud churned by endless trucks, trucks that come in the night with plenty of warning, but still unbidden, a world of gray that cannot stand. Our arsenal must be a prism. We shall lay new sod, green, lush, where the land is scarred. We shall break open the coffers of color and paint the sky again, blue and gold. Let us go now down to the riverside. Let us gather round smooth stones, pile them on the shore. He forgets that gray is also a color.
I have to say that the skill makes the poem what it is. The content is incredible, the images. But do you know from the line, we shall lay sod, for 5 lines, you had 1-syllable words?
I have never really thought of it
It is so
that
beautiful. And
way.
also above that, a couple lines above that are all 1-syllable words. And it is just astonishing to me because you don't, I guess that is the heartbeat of your poetry and makes the meaning. It's the lilt. So since you are a writer and a poet and sees the world so with such special vision, you were a special educator. What does that mean?
I worked in the field of special education. I stumbled into it. It wasn't what I did my undergrad studies in. I studied history and philosophy, and I knew that philosophers don't make a lot of money and neither do poets. So so I needed to have a field, and I went into education, but I couldn't get a job teaching history or social studies in Maryland, and I didn't particularly at that time want to move. I ended up with a job working. I worked with people who had children and adolescents who had severe disabilities, who had intellectual disabilities primarily, which is almost a meaningless term. But what it meant was that their primary struggle, what separated them from others, was language. The difficulty, the great difficulty in learning to use formal verbal language. And that was the primary thing. And so it made so little sense to me that people should be, and this was back in the 80s, that people should be kept apart from society. And this was what was happening still back then, simply because they couldn't speak and say what was on their mind. You know, that
And you helped.
I was part of that whole movement toward inclusion and deinstitutionalization. And what I was so intrigued by, I had students who had not even we didn't have the same levels of technology either available to us. And I said, you know, these children figured out how to walk. They can feed themselves. You cannot tell me that they cannot learn.
Oh,
So why can we not find ways to give them the thing that they're most lacking, which is language? And so that became a huge part of my work. And then, I was in the classroom for a while. I went back to school. I studied it more, and I ended up as a consultant and a teacher trainer and a teacher mentor. But it was always about, once again, it was always about translation.
Your
translating
life
what these people were trying to tell us.
has a theme, Luther. Your life has a golden thread through it, and it's all about the same thing. So let us hear another poem.
Here's another poem. This is a gentler poem, but it's still about world events. A wartime lullaby. In the night station, great blue whales whistle down the long, worn benches. Their songs are crimson, their breath smells of oranges. Sleepy mothers wrap little babies in bunting, sigh and yearn for a place in the deep country where the moon is always full. Once the last train leaves, there will be no one left to remember the words the whales whispered, but the babes who doze in their mother's long arms will never stop singing about those whales, the great hulk of their bodies as they float through the waiting room, the way their fins gently wave in the cool, clean air of the night.
In the cool, clear air of the night.
There are two-syllable words, though, in the poem.
Oh, yes, I do know you know more than one syllable. I'm just enchanted with it. I am just obsessed with your work here. And you have a book that says that you're not quite in search of your father. And I was wondering what the father means in literature. I think you were in a workshop once at Mariposa where we did a father workshop. But I may be wrong. But what does the father mean in literature to men writers?
To men writers, I think the father. Now, this may have to become something more than what I say. My own relationship with my father was not easy. It was difficult. He was of that generation that saw the Depression, saw the war. Um, what he saw, not to belittle it, but it was not incredibly traumatizing compared to what some people's fathers saw. But that generation didn't talk much
Mm.
about what they had lived through, you know?
And was he unreachable?
He was difficult to reach. I think he really, when I started trying to put it together, it was coming out as poetry, and that's why the book is called Poems Written in Search of My Father. I was trying to figure him out after the fact because most of those poems were written after he had passed away.
Right.
Um,
What do you think men are trying to do? It's a really a time-honored theme. And is it always to make contact?
um,
It's to say what could not be said?
I think with a lot of men who write about their fathers, it is. I think of Allen Ginsberg's poem, I Never Said Kaddish for My Father,
Mm, mm.
you know. I'm thinking of some of the work of some of my contemporaries who write about fathers who are difficult to reach, you know. But I think that not everyone has that same experience. There are certainly men whose fathers were much more reachable, and that they're able
Of
to
course, each
relate.
experience is different, but the poet is always trying to cross a bridge, it seems. So let us now have a final poem.
Here, since we're going to cross a bridge, this is from my most recent collection, Watchman, What of the Night. And the title is a pun, and so it doesn't always work well if you're not seeing it in print. It is Conquered, Unconquered. Conquered, Concord. There it lingers, unfinished. The story we labored to sing in whistled mornings by rude arches, mist-hovered fields of April. Our notes imperfect, let us acknowledge, even discordant, stone, never polished, always rough-hewn, damp with dawn, as if camp smoke furled to sting our eyes, shroud half-visioned peak, and all we glimpsed, a spark, mirror flash. Oh, beautiful, what's hidden past our grasp, our muscled strife. We do not want this hymn to end. Glory to the muck. The sawdust floor, scrawled signature, torn bandage, mouth harp and conch shell, forever. Amen.
That is the voice of Luther Jett, and this is the poet and the poem from the Library of Congress. The series was produced by Forest Woods Media Productions, post-production by Mike Turpin, MET Studios. We wish to thank the Library of Congress for making the program possible. Funding is provided by the Sinipit Fund, Natalie Canavar, and Sandy Jackson Cohen. Our engineer is Michael Turpin, and I'm Grace Cavalieri.